I have a new toy to play with, an electronic composter. In this video, I'm going to do a review of this product. I'll show you how to use it. I'll show you the compost that it produces. And then I'll give you my impressions of this kind of device and try and help you decide if it's the kind of machine you should be adding to your kitchen. Now this machine is the Nagual, and it's produced by a company called Nagual. It's an Asian company that has been doing quite well in Asia, and they're now entering the North American market. And they were kind enough to send me one of these units for review. So although they did give me the unit, I'm under no obligation to give any kind of special review. I'm going to give an honest review of this product. So what is an electronic composter? Well, these are new machines. They entered the market about 3 or 4 years ago, and they're becoming more popular. There's about a dozen different manufacturers right now. Most of them are fairly similar to this. They're smaller units that you plug in. You take your kitchen scraps and put it in the machine. The machine grinds it up, heats it, dries off the moisture, and turns it into compost. At least that is the claim of all of these manufacturers. Now some of them do use core, so you have to buy core and put it in with your kitchen scraps. Others use microbes that you have to add. But this machine uses neither of those, and I don't see why either of those are necessary in this process. The unit itself is about 1 foot square and 1.5 feet high. It's a fairly large appliance for most kitchens, but as you can see, it fits nicely on the counter. It is going to heat up the kitchen scraps, and it produces steam coming out of the unit. Now that's not a heavy steam like you get out of a kettle, but there is some moisture coming out of the back. It's probably best not to set this right at the back under your cabinets, because the moisture will rise up and maybe damage your cabinets. So when I run it, I usually have it out in the open like this so that the moisture can go into the air. Now let's have a look at how you use this unit. It has a lid that comes off. It's quite easy to turn and lock. The machine itself is quite well made. I'm quite impressed with the design of the lid. It fits in here nicely and then locks into place. It has a bucket inside that has different sized notches, so it has to fit in the right way. If you line up these screws here to the right side of the machine, it goes in easily. The bucket itself holds 2 liters, but you can't fill it all the way. There's a line in here and you shouldn't fill it more than that. So it doesn't actually hold that much material. We collect our kitchen scraps in one of these reused ice cream containers, and we keep that in the fridge. And when this is full, that's just about right for 1 batch. But I have some kitchen scraps that were out in the cold, and I'm going to use those. So it will take almost anything from the kitchen. So an old tea bag, an orange rind, here's an old banana peel, eggshells, potato peelings, apple cores. Now I haven't been cutting these up, but some people suggest cutting them into smaller pieces. I think that's just a waste of time. You can also put in some meat. I don't know why you would do that. We eat our meat, we don't compost it. Larger bones like beef bones should not be put in here. They're too hard. Chicken bones and fish scale and fish bones, they can go in here. Now apparently some hard vegetables like big carrot pieces and the heart from a cabbage are too hard, and it's recommended that you cut those up. I've even tried putting in some wet paper towels. That's one thing that we're not supposed to throw in our garbage, but I don't like putting it into my outdoor compost either because paper just takes too long to decompose. So I tried it in here and it worked fairly well, except for one problem. If this is too moist, the cycle here ends up producing wet material. And I've had to run it twice a couple times because the material is just too wet. And that usually happens if I put in some wet paper towels. Slide the bucket into place, make sure it's seated well. If you don't get it in right, the lid won't go in, so you'll know right away that you've got it right. lock it into place, and there's an on-off button here that's extremely sensitive. Just touch it and the machine will start up. So how long does a batch take? Well, the promotional material says it can be as short as an hour and a half, but I found that even small batches take at least 2.5 to 3 hours. My average batch is somewhere between 3 and 5 hours. And as I mentioned, if it's too wet, you have to run it twice if you want the material to be dry. So that means that you have a hydro cost to run this, but that's pretty inexpensive. So it takes about a kilowatt hour to run one batch. Here in Canada, that's about 10 cents Canadian. So in the US, maybe 7 cents US for one cycle. That's not very expensive, but keep in mind, it is an energy cost, and we have to produce more energy to support these kinds of machines. The list price of this machine is $700 US, but you can get it on sale as a promotion for about $300. Now, most of these units are selling for around the $300 mark, and I think you'll be able to get an electronic composter in that range, provided it's one of these kitchen size ones. There are a few larger models that are floor models, and they're going to be more expensive, but I don't think you have to pay more than $300, and as these become more popular, that price will come down. There's also another maintenance cost to these. Inside here are 2 large charcoal cylinders. They filter the moisture coming out of the machine and take the odors out of the air. Now, I'll be honest with you, when this runs, you can't smell anything from the process. Now, I've opened it up a couple times to smell inside, see what's going on. Yeah, there is an odor, but I wouldn't say it's a bad odor, and it's certainly not a very strong odor. Now, that may depend on what you're processing. You know, maybe if you're doing a lot of cabbage or something, maybe it gets stinky. I don't know. A lot of ours have orange peels in there, and that actually makes it smell kind of nice. The cost of those cylinders is $90 for 2, and it's suggested you replace those every 6 months. Now, you can get them on sale for $30 for a set of 2, but that's still an ongoing cost you have to factor in to using the machine. I'm going to turn this on now so you can hear the noise that comes from the machine. I'm about the same distance away from the microphone, so we'll see how this sounds to you. It's a pretty quiet unit, and I don't think the noise would disturb you even if you're sitting in the kitchen or watching TV or something. Now let me show you the cartridge filters. They're located in the bottom of the machine. Now the machine itself seems really well built. My only complaint is this one area here, and it's this hatch. I'm not quite sure why this is at the bottom when you have to replace this periodically. But my real complaint is the door itself. There's a little bit of a hatch here with a little plastic tab to open it. And I don't trust this plastic tab. I think it's going to break off. The 2 cylinders are inside here, and I take them out, except that they're held in place with little black screws. And the instructions say that when you're ready to replace these, either take these plastic screws out or just cut them off. And I can't get them out to show you the cartridges, and I don't want to cut them off because I don't have spares. I guess they ship you spares when you order the new cartridges. So you have to take these black screws off, take these cylinders out, and quite honestly, there's no room for your fingers in here. This needs more space and an easier way to access these. Put the new cylinders in. Put the hatch back. And the hatch doesn't catch on its own. You actually have to fiddle with it and press it back into place. The first time I did this, I had the machine sitting here and I picked it up to move it over there, and the door just fell on the floor. You have to actually press in and then push the latch over to make it work. So I've just finished a batch, and I want to show you what comes out of the machine. Once the material is dry, it does come out of here quite well. You could wash this, and this is dishwasher safe, but there's probably no need to do that. You can just leave it the way it is and use it in a couple of days for your next batch. The material is quite large. Now, if you look at the promotions for these kinds of machines, they always show you this nice fine powder that you get. And they call it plant fertilizer. But in fact, that's not what I'm getting out of the machine. Each time I run it, what I get is fairly large pieces. Now, some of it is smaller and dust-like, but the majority of it is quite large. I can clearly see pieces of orange peel in here. If I put a banana in, the stem of the banana is usually there. I certainly would not call this ground up material. Now, I think the Nagual system is pretty well made, and it works quite well. I've used it for about 7 batches now, and it runs quite well. I think the time that's needed is a little longer than advertised. It does the job that it claims. Well, sort of. And I want to spend a bit of time looking at these claims. Now, the claims I'm going to discuss right now are not specific to this brand. These claims are made by almost all the electronic composters. So let's start with what they do. All of them make a big deal about composting your kitchen scraps. They even show you that you can take the finished product here and feed your plants with it. I wouldn't do that, and here's why. There is zero composting taking place here. What this machine does is it dries your kitchen scraps. Okay? Remember, it's a 3-hour process. Composting is a slow process that microbes take care of. Here we've got 3 hours of hot steam. That kills your microbes. So essentially it's sterilizing your kitchen scraps and it's driving off the moisture. There's no decomposition and there's no composting. I've contacted 3 or 4 different manufacturers and asked them for the evidence they have to show that there's any composting taking place. None of them have it. The reason is it doesn't compost. What it produces is dehydrated kitchen waste. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I wish these manufacturers were more honest with what they produce. The second claim they make is that they grind this into a fine fertilizer for your plants. And they'll show you pictures like this one. They show you this fine brown powder. Well, you've seen the material you actually get out of here. And the reason you get that is it doesn't really grind, although that's what they claim. There are blades in here and they do turn, but they turn very slowly. One source I found says they turn once a minute. The blades aren't sharp, they're not cutting anything. They're basically mixing this material to make it easier for the moisture to get out. And it does fall apart to some extent. The particles are smaller than when they went in. But you can very easily recognize the material. It's certainly not ground into a fine brown powder as they advertise. It is energy efficient, takes very little energy. It's very low cost to run. My wife and I don't produce a lot of kitchen waste. And we could run this 2 or 3 times a week, kind of 2.5 times a week to handle all of our kitchen waste. Now, what do you do with material that comes out of here? And I think that's the important question we need to ask. Well, there are a couple of options. Now, you could throw it into the garbage. So one of the claims here is that it reduces the volume so you have less garbage. But that's a really bad idea. If you send this material or your unprocessed kitchen scraps, either one, to landfill, they produce methane, which is worse than CO2 for the atmosphere. For global warming, we don't want to send our kitchen scraps to the landfill site. We want to do something else with it. Anything else is better than landfill. We can take those and compost them. So does it make sense to run this machine and then take this material out and put it in your compost bin? I don't really think so. The material composts just fine as it is. It doesn't need to be dried first. Now there might be some advantages to running this in the winter if you're living cold climates, because that way you can dry it and save it and then take it outside in spring and put it in your compost pile. But I solve that problem with a bucket that's sitting in the garage. It's cold enough there that the material doesn't rot, and in spring I just put it in a compost pile. You can also send your kitchen scraps or the material this produces into your green bin. So if your municipality picks up material for composting, that's a good option. But again, there's really no value in running this machine just so you can dry it, so you can send it to the city to compost. You can also take this material and take it outside and put it in the garden, dig it in the soil, and it will decompose. But so will the kitchen scraps. It doesn't decompose any faster once it's dried. And in fact, I might suggest it dries slower because you've taken all the moisture out, which is required for composting, and you've killed all the microbes. Now, the soil will add more moisture to it and add microbes, so this will decompose just fine in the garden, but I don't see any benefit to drying it first. This machine does make sense in a number of situations. If you don't or can't compost, you need to do something else. If your municipality does not pick up your kitchen scraps and does not compost those, then this machine makes some sense. You can dry the material down. Once it's dry, it can sit here and it's very stable. It doesn't smell, it doesn't rot, and then give it to someone else to use in the garden. Or even take it out in the woods and spread it around. Now I know you really shouldn't do that, because if we all started doing that, we'd have garbage everywhere. But as long as you take this material and get it in the soil somewhere, even if you don't have your own garden, then that is beneficial. It's better than sending it to landfill. Some of you might run vermicompost bins. Those are worm bins for your garbage. Or perhaps you do bokashi. Now you can take this material and use it in either of those systems as well, but you can do that with the raw material. You don't have to process it first. So I think the machine has its place, and the real benefit would be in drying and reducing the volume of material so that maybe there's less of it to send somewhere else. But the idea of creating compost here is wrong. Now personally, I would not put this on my houseplants. It's not compost. It's basically kitchen scraps. I mean, would you take your apple core and put it on your houseplant? Well, there's no difference between the apple core and the dried apple core. It's the same thing. Now I'm going to run some tests and take this material and grow things in it and see how it does. And I'll make a separate video for that. It's going to take me a couple months to get that done. But I want to see if in fact this will harm your houseplants. So here's my final message. Don't send kitchen scraps to landfill. It's harming the environment. It's much, much worse than CO2. And you know what that's doing to global warming. You have to do something else with it. There are better options than this, but if this is your only option, an electronic composter is better than sending it to landfill. And if you're going to buy a unit, this is actually a pretty nice unit. It looks good, it's well made, and I think it'll become quite popular in the North American market space. If you're interested in the unit, I have a link below that'll take you to a site where you'll get a big discount right now. See you in the next video.